I just wanted to say thank you very, very much for asking me to come and speak today. It means a lot to me. As Leslie was mentioning earlier, this was our home church years ago, and a lot has happened since then in our lives. When I came here, I was newly married, and I had two very cute little boys who were much like the same ages as the children that were up today, and it brought back a lot of memories, and it's really nice to be here again. And this is a beautiful church and very beautiful people, and I thank you again. So, talking a little bit about my journey. My journey begins that I wanted to share today I had been married to a wonderful man, and everybody goes through all sorts of different ups and downs in their marriages and in their lives. And we had gone through a rough patch, and we had worked it out. We had figured it out, and we were having a wonderful time. We were traveling, and both of our kids had just started universities in other cities, and we were just having a blast. It was almost like a second honeymoon. And we had been invited to a wedding in a place called Monterrey, Mexico. And it's not a resort town at all. It's an industrial city, but it's very beautiful because there's a huge mountain in the middle of the city that's something out of Dr. Seuss. It's got like this pointed thing in it, and it's just very, very strange considering all the land around it is very flat. And we were at this wedding, and in Mexico, if you're a Mexican citizen, you have to be married not only in the church, but you also have to be married by the actual state that you live in. So we were in between the church and the Golf and Country Club, where they chose to do the civil ceremony. And we were on a bus, and it was 114 degrees outside. And the bus was beautifully air conditioned, but going between each place was really, really hot. So it was a bit of a dramatic day because it was summertime back home, but nothing like this oppressive heat. So we were sort of in between things, and for those of you who know me, I have my CPR, and I'm a scuba diver, and I like to be prepared, and I have my first aid, and I've got my defibrillation certification. And all of a sudden, my husband wasn't looking right, and he hates the heat. So, it was just like, oh, it's just the heat. He collapsed, literally on the floor beside me in the aisleway, and I was convinced that he had had a heart attack, and I started preparing to do CPR, and he came to again. But he didn't look right. He didn't look like he was sort of ashen, and he always had great color, and it just didn't make any sense. He refused to go and see the Mexican medical people because he seemed to be fine. Got through the evening, and then we left the next day on an airplane and came home. And there was something that happened when he collapsed. There was a feeling. God has always sort of tapped me on the shoulder whenever things were happening that I needed to be aware of, that I needed to know that this is going to be a shift. This is going to be a big change. Hang on to your boots, sister, and hang on to my hand. So we got home. They did the workup with his cardio and his respiratory, and everything checked out, and everything was fine. So we thought, good. Then Thanksgiving came, and it was a Saturday morning, and he had his own business, and he had said, I've got to go out and do a service call with some of the guys. And he was late. I needed him to come home and help me getting stuff prepared because we were having a big Thanksgiving feast the next day. And I couldn't reach him, and I reached one of the guys who was supposed to be with him, and he didn't know anything about this service call. And I was getting worried. This wasn't like him. He wasn't. And he came home, and he looked terrible, and he said, I need to talk to you. And he said, I need to talk to you back in the barn. So we left the kids in the house, and we went back to the barn. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I said, what is going on? And he said, I need to tell you that I have a brain tumor, and it's really big. And he started crying, and I started crying. And so we began the journey. The brain tumor that he had at the time they thought was very slow growing. And what happened was one of our very best friends had died of brain cancer just a year and a half before that time. And we had come to know what it looks like when you have a brain tumor that's killing you in a very personal and upfront way. So consequently, as we went along and they were slowly trying to investigate it, his brain tumor started to grow exponentially, and his symptoms started to increase. He was put on medication, and then he got to a point, it was around Christmas time, and I remember we went to the CBC Christmas party. He was hilarious. He had everybody laughing, and he hadn't even had a drink. And he was the clown of which was, if anybody knew him, he was very reserved, very quiet. He would have been laughing at other people's jokes, not leading. So by the time we got in the car, he was really dopey. And by 3 o'clock in the morning, I was really worried because things were starting to shut down. And by 5 o'clock in the morning, I got in touch and I said, I'm bringing him in. And we brought him into the emergency room, and I knew the head of the ER there at Hotel Dieu, and he wouldn't even look in my eye. He wouldn't even talk to me, he wouldn't smile, and I thought, oh dear, things are really bad. And he proceeded to get worse during that time period, and eventually the surgeon on call ended up coming and examining him and telling me that he might not make it through the night. They may have to do the surgery overnight or into the morning. You need to understand there was a huge snowstorm that was also brewing, that was coming. So it was around Christmas time, and it was going to be like the one that just went through that we missed, only we got it head on. So I tried to get in touch with his family who were in Niagara, and they made it in just in time. And they ended up doing the surgery in the morning. And as I'm sitting in the waiting room, I had friends just come and sit with us that just came out of nowhere, that gave us so much comfort and so much support. And it turned out to be a 9-hour surgery, and it was very serious, and he ended up coming through beautifully, and that surgeon had actually saved his life. And that became our pattern. One more time again, the tumor would grow back, surgery would save him. But with brain tumors, you can only cut so much until you start getting into areas of the body where it can influence major function, such as breathing, such as talking, such as walking, and you don't want to remove those parts. So we started getting closer and closer to those regions, and it was when we were waiting on the third surgery that things were just starting to progress pretty quickly. And we all kind of knew that we had been living on borrowed time. And we just embraced that time with him and embraced that time with each other. And the kids were home as much as they could be. Dan insisted that they be at school and not stop their lives waiting for him to die because he wanted them to live. So we were in communication and visiting. And you need to understand that he was a man that loved his independence. His hobby was flying, and he had a plane that we would fly in quite a bit. And right away, he had to give that up. He'd had to give up driving. He'd had to give up all of his independence. And it was tough to watch somebody that independent lose everything, and just the different stages of grief that he went through personally as we were going through the same process, knowing what was going to happen. But we were so lucky that we were given time. I've since met so many people who've lost their loved ones suddenly, and they don't have that chance, and they don't have those moments to think about and to wonder, like what do you need us to do? What do you want to say? That in itself is completely a luxury. The neat thing that happened with Dan was that his faith just ballooned. With his last 6 months of life, he was so close to God. It wasn't that he wasn't before, it just wasn't his priority. But facing death the way he was, he got to know God very, very close, so much so that the pastoral chaplain at the hospital pulled me aside at one point and said, you know, I rarely get to see someone who's this ready. He said, it's so beautiful, and it's so easy for me because I don't have to. So that was really, really nice. And the amazing part was how God just carried us. Our whole family felt like we were just held completely and totally. Yes, don't get me wrong, there were times when we went through anger and we went through despair and we went through worry as to what was going to happen next. But we just had to let it go. And there are times in our lives when everything feels like it's falling apart, but there truly is a greater purpose.